everyone. This is John Daly again with BQB Publishing. I'm here today with Daniel V. Meier Jr., author of the new mystery thriller Guidance to Death. How's it going today, Dan?
Very well, John.
Excellent, excellent. So, Dan, you have been putting out a lot of really great novels over the last few years. Your books have won all kinds of awards. You're really hitting your stride as an author. You always have a very cool hat, which I think it's important to mention. I definitely appreciate that. What is your secret to being such a prolific quality writer?
Gee, John, I don't know how to answer so many compliments at once. I don't have any secrets. Like most people who write and who have the time to do it. I now have the time, more time than I used to have. I write every day, whether it's a paragraph or whether it's 5 or 6 pages. But also, I need to mention that, like you, I started writing when I was very young, teenager, in fact. And after college, I deluded myself that I could actually make a living as a novelist and writer. Well, after a few years of that, my wife said, you got to get a job. So I did. Anyway, several of these books I wrote during that period in my 30s and late 20s, like Bloodroot, for example. No Birds Sing Here, I wrote, well, in my early 30s. And I tried once to find a publisher and didn't, and I just put them away in a cardboard box and went and got a job as a flight instructor. And being a flight instructor, I still had time to write, which I did. And heck, half the stuff is still in that box, but I don't think it's good enough to seek publication. But a good friend of mine that I worked with at the FAA used to entertain me at lunch with his stories about being a bush pilot in West Africa. It's kind of like, well, that reminds me of when I was stranded up the Rio Pungo, that kind of thing. And finally I said, Les, you ought to write this stuff down, because when you go to that great airport in the sky, it's going to be forgotten. So he said, yeah, I would, but I knew he wouldn't. So I got his permission to write his story. And after a lot of expensive lunches and a lot of tapes, I got it all taped. And I made a novel out of it. I novelized it. He didn't want it to be a memoir, because in a memoir you have to be accurate, and he wasn't too sure of the dates and stuff like that. So I made a novel out of it, and that got me back into it, actually. After that, I wrote Blood Before Dawn, a sequel to it, and then the other books I've written, like you said. And so thanks to Les, I got back into it, and I've never had such a good time. Except when I was flying, of course. That's always a good time. And but as far as the awards go, the only reason I'm doing it is to be noticed. And also, since the books have won a number of awards, it's kind of telling me that at last, finally, I'm doing something right. So so that's the reason for that, John. No secret, just hard work, perseverance, and that sort of thing, just like everybody else does.
Mhm. Well, that's great that you're receiving the recognition. You're putting out some great stuff, and I know readers are definitely enjoying it. Now, your new book is Guidance to Death. It's the first
Yep,
novel in the Frank Adams detective series. Who is
right.
this guy, Frank Adams, and what is your book about?
Well, Adams is like most characters, I think, in a novel. Adams is a compilation of people I've known, experiences I've had, and that sort of thing. He's a retired NTSB accident investigator. I know something about the NTSB because I worked with them as an FAA inspector. In fact, did a couple of, well, more than a couple, did some accident investigation myself. and a very good friend of mine was an accident investigator also, and we did a lot of talking about it. And so that's kind of who Frank Adams is. He's a decent guy. He quit NTSB, or he was retired from NTSB because of the influence of the industry. And the aviation industry is a very powerful, wealthy organization. I mean, the Airline Transport Association, and they can influence politicians, and they do. So he decided that based on that, he could no longer work as an honest person. So he retired. And I know some people are going to question that probably, but you know they need to work in government for a while and see how much power the industry has. I'm not saying it's open and outright corruption. Let's just call it influence. Okay. Anyway, that's why he retired, and he opened up a shop on his own, which is in reality probably an unlikely thing to do, because let's face it, there aren't that many airplane accidents. So I fudged it a little bit. I said, well, he also investigates automobile accidents, and there are a lot of those. But that's who he is. He he um, he starts off investigating the accident, but it will usually devolve into some sort of crime, a murder, something like that. That's who it is. And what was the other part? Let's see.
Oh, just about what the book was about.
Oh, what's it about? It's it's got all. I think, John, it's got all the home run themes. Uh, the effects of greed, uh, ambition, betrayal, uh, lies, deceit, all that kind of thing. What will people do for wealth and power? Will they commit murder? Will they lie and steal? Some people will. And it's also interested me, you know, at some point, I'm kind of curious about, and I think most of us have been to that point. At some point, you decide, no, I'm not going to do this, and you back away from it. But some people, take for example Bernard Madoff, nice guy. I mean, picture of him in high school, wears tie and everything, and people liked him. He was popular, and he went into business. But at some point, Mr. Madoff decided he was going to cross the line. What made him do that? And I suspect it was the same thing that makes other people do it. He simply couldn't resist the rewards, no matter how nefarious they would be. And he decided that yes, maybe I'll deal with the consequences, or I won't think about the consequences. And that's what the book is about. It's about an electronics company that make guidance instruments for airplanes. And they have international customers as well as national ones, and the government also is a customer. The company is run by a man in his late 70s who's not doing so well, and his son-in-law, who is the CEO, wants to take over. Anyway, he's killed by a jealous rival, executive rival, and he's killed by the sabotaging the airplane, so that when the pilot takes off from Reagan Airport, um, he's in instrument conditions, which when you're in the clouds, you can't see anything but clouds. So you have to trust your instruments completely. And that's difficult to do, except for an experienced pilot. And even then, sometimes experienced pilots will lose it. Because what's happening is, and if I'm boring you, John, say so and I'll stop.
No, not at
The
all.
last
Not
thing
at
I
all.
want to do is bore somebody. But what happens is that your inner ear is telling you what you're not seeing on your instruments. For example, your inner ear is telling you you're in a turn, but your instruments show you in level flight. But you cannot resist trying to pull out of that turn, because once you get the airplane in a turn, the nose will drop and down you'll go. So you start to counteract that, but you're doing just the opposite of what's happening in the airplane. And the more you do that, I used to do that little experiment when I taught ground school. I'd put people in what's called a Benson's chair, and I'd put a blindfold on them and give them a stick, and they would indicate which way the chair was turning by moving the stick. For example, if I rotated it counterclockwise, then they would move the stick over to the left. But then I'd get them up to a certain speed, and then I'd slowly bring it to a stop, and they would bring the stick up, and then they move the stick over to the right. Then the chair wasn't moving at all. That was always impressive to the students because that showed that he was thinking, I'm in a left turn, so I'm going to correct to the right, when he was really not moving at all. So that's what happens. The airplane goes in, blows up, and the investigation starts. The executive's wife is convinced that it was murder. So she convinces Adams to look into it, and he does. But he doesn't look into it as a criminal investigator. He simply looks into it as what caused the accident, and of course stumbles upon the murder. That's what it's about.
Excellent. Sounds
And
very interesting.
as I said, all the home run themes are there. You know, little adultery thrown in, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Cool. So you mentioned you got into this a little bit that you do have a background in flight aviation and also inspection. I'm kind of curious. Can you tell people a little bit about that? You know what you did as an inspector.
Well, as an inspector, uh, well, okay. I'm trying to simplify it, John.
Thank you.
Essentially,
I appreciate
essentially, I started working in the field office, what's called a flight standards district office. And my job, I was principal inspector for a couple of 135 operators. And if you want to know what that is, I'll tell you. It's like an on-demand air carrier. So I was ops inspector for them, and mainly my job was to see to it that they complied with the regulations, both training and in flight, and that they maintained their currency. And trust me, that was a scary thing. You're flying with people you don't know. They're in the left seat, and things start to go wrong. And anyway, I could tell you some sea stories about that, but I won't bother you with that. But that's what I did, and then I went to headquarters, and I was a staffer at headquarters, which means that I did nothing of any importance except worked on regulations and occasionally did en route inspections on air carriers, that sort of thing. Had the advantage, though, of doing a lot of traveling because I was on a working group that met in various places in Europe and South America. So I'd been to every European capital out there and many of the South American locations, and Canada. Oh yeah, we met regularly in Canada. It was an icing working group that dealt with icing issues and problems. Very, very complex. And by the way, that's what brings down the airplane and guidance to death. They load up with ice, and a lot of people think that it's the weight of the ice on the airplane that brings it down, but it isn't. It's the change in shape that it causes of the airfoil, and then once that change in shape is disrupted, then the lift is lost, and down you go. So, did I answer your question, John, or am I just going on and running over the mouth?
No, I think you did. So it was
Oh,
it's
okay.
sort of interesting. And the reason I was interested in what you did too, along with how it applies to the book. Coincidentally, I recently interviewed another author under our publisher, Mark Stephen Porro. He wrote a really good book called A Cup of Tea on the Commode. It's a nonfiction. Um, I love the title. I love the title
Yeah.
too. And he happens to be a former Hollywood actor, and believe it or not, he played the flight navigator in the movie Castaway with Tom Hanks.
Yeah.
Now, when I was talking to him, he insists that it was not his character's fault that the plane crashed, but
I was the navigator in the crash scene. Uh, though I did not cause the crash, I tried to save the plane. It just didn't work out.
I am not sure. I'm not sure he's right about that. I wanted to check with you, Dan. Do you think Mark and his plane would have passed a Dan Meier inspection.
Well, first of all, I would have said to the captain, why aren't you flying around those thunderstorms? You've got adequate weather radar. And because they looked like they were flying into a line of thunderstorms. Or if you don't want to go around them, go over them. A jet airplane can usually climb over pretty much anything except maybe a Texas thunderstorm. And I've done that before too. I mean, so yeah, I thought, well, the second thing is they complained about losing communication. Well, out in the middle of the ocean, you don't have any. You have no radar coverage, and sometimes seldom any radio communication until you get, when the proper. I mean, the Earth is a big place,
Yes.
and flying at 40,000 feet, that's not really high up, So your line of sight transmission doesn't go all that far, relatively speaking, of course. So, and this notion, I think they got lost, which or didn't know their position, which is ridiculous. Not with the onboard navigational equipment they had. You don't lose your position ever. One of the rules in aviation is, and what I used to teach was, you know where you are all the time. You do not try to figure out where you are. You know where you are all the time. And to do that, you keep up with your calculations and with your electronic equipment all the time. And then the explosive decompression occurred. Well, that does happen. Rarely, but it does. And a fire in the cabin, okay, that could happen. I think it has once or twice in the history of aviation. But then apparently an engine was destroyed by debris. Well, these airplanes are designed and built to fly on one engine, and they can do so quite well. Usually at lower altitudes, but there was no, from what I could see or what I remember, it's been a while since I've seen the movie. What I remember is that there was no reason, no aerodynamic reason for them to crash. So yeah, that would have been my issue had I been there. And ironically, to show you that life is full of irony, John, as you know, you mentioned the flight of the navigator and the things you sent me. Well, one of my instructors at the FAA Training Academy was the technical advisor for that movie.
Oh, interesting.
And yeah, Kevin Shear. And I later worked with him in headquarters. And then we did some flying together as well. So it's kind of odd, isn't it, how that happens?
It is absolutely, absolutely.
He didn't say much about the movie, whether he liked it or not. I asked him, I said, well, you were the technical advisor. He said, yeah, that's it. And that was about the end of the conversation.
Oh, that's all right. He did his job, though, right? So, kind of going back to writing, this is always a question I like to ask authors. What do you find most challenging about writing? In your case, fiction.
I think for me, it's plotting. Plotting is to me challenging. I've tried making outlines, I never follow them. I've tried being spontaneous, and that doesn't work. It's just very difficult plotting. I don't have a problem creating characters so much, but plotting, yeah, that's for some reason that's difficult, and it's getting more difficult the older I get. Let's put it that way. When I was in my 20s and 30s, I could make up any kind of fool story, but now too many brain cells have been destroyed by abuse of alcohol. So
I hear you. As someone who has tried outlining myself and my writing and so many times strayed from it, as different ideas come in, I get it. It's, you want to have some sort of structure, but, you don't want to box yourself in. And sometimes,
no,
yeah.
and that's exactly it. Yeah, you feel boxed in. And I once saw, let's see, what was his name? Harold Robbins. He was a potboiler writer back in the 70s, 80s. And when I first heard him say it, I thought it was a bit silly. But now I think I'm starting to agree with him. Someone asked him about plotting. He said, "Well," and he had this New York accent. Well, yeah, I was the other day. I was writing, and then all of a sudden the car blew up. There's a car in the story, and then he said, "I said, hey, the car blew up." Like he was surprised or something. But in a sense, yeah, that's sometimes how it does happen. Yeah.
Yeah, it sort of takes on a life of its own a little bit, doesn't it?
Yes, a life of
Storytelling.
its own, John. You're exactly right. Yeah, you're
Great.
exactly right.
Well, thank you. And thanks for doing this interview. This is probably a good place to wrap things up. I want to thank
Uh,
you for your time. Can you tell people, Dan, how to find out more about you and your books?
well, like everybody else, uh, Terry insisted that I have a website, and so whatever Terry says, I do. And so my wife, who is much more agile at computers than I am, created a very nice website. It's at danielmeyerauthor.com, and everything that I want the public to know is on that website. The stuff I don't want the public to know, they'll have to check the police records. Okay, but
That'll be a good challenge for somebody
yeah,
out there.
right,
Well, great.
yeah.
Thanks a lot, Dan.
Well,
Anything
this was
else you'd
fun,
like to
John.
say?
This was fun. Thank you.
It was.
I was sort of dreading it because you know, and these things you feel a little exposed, and a little vulnerable. But no, this was fun. I got a chance to meet you at last, and you're not such a bad guy, really.
Well, you don't know me that well yet. So. There may be more too. No, I agree. I always have fun talking to authors. So much of my correspondence is usually through email, so it's good to sort of have a
Mm.
face-to-face conversation once in a while. And I definitely had a good time with this one, Dan. So thanks again, and you have yourself a great day. Okay.
You're welcome, John, and thank you very much.